And can you see my presentation?
Yes, and we can hear you.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak. And actually, this has been quite educational to me already through this. And I think you'll find what I have to present is a lot more pedestrian than the other discussions you've had. Uh, but I guess I could sort of summarize what we're doing is we are making a web uh, version of PV Watts that is customized to Saudi Arabia for our consumers in the kingdom. And so I would like to acknowledge a few collaborators here. There's a couple of other folks at KA Care, which is the King Abdullah City for Atomic and Renewable Energy. That is the Saudi Arabia government's renewable energy agency. And we also have a web developer team from a company called Link Development in Egypt. So with that as a brief intro, there we go. Okay. So Saudi Arabia is introducing a net billing scheme for distributed PV, and it might be a surprise to you to hear that there is currently no regulation in Saudi Arabia that allows people to install PV that's grid connected in the distribution system. Up till now, all of the action has been in utility scale, and in fact, we've been somewhat slow in doing that. Saudi Arabia has big plans to do utility scale PV, but distributed is not so much of an emphasis, even though it is recognized that distributed PV could result in a lot of job creation, and jobs are a very important issue in Saudi Arabia. So I want to say about 18 months ago or so, the regulator put out a proposed scheme for net billing, net metering initially. And that prompted a lot of discussion that has resulted in a shift to using net billing instead. And for anyone who's not familiar with the difference, which I wasn't at first, in net metering, I guess the easiest way to think of it is that the difference between net metering and net billing is that in net metering, when you export, you get a credit in kilowatt hours against your bill, but in net billing, you get a credit in money for whenever you're exporting. So if your if your consumption exceeds your generation, then your bill is offset at whatever your consumption tariff is. But anytime your system is generating more power than it is than you're consuming, that exported power is metered and turned into a financial credit immediately. So it would look the same as net metering if your export tariff and your consumption tariff were the same. But the main reason for using net billing is for that to not be the case. And in particular, if you anticipate electric rates going up in the future, but once someone has installed their PV system, you don't want to increase the amount of remuneration they're getting for exported electricity in the future. Net billing is a good solution for that. This program is being done as an intergovernmental effort within the Saudi government. In Saudi Arabia, there's an overarching ministry called the Ministry of Energy, Industry, and Minerals, called MEAN for short. And the electricity regulator is called the Electricity and Cogeneration Regulatory Authority, or ECRA. And in Saudi Arabia, there's been discussions, and there is a plan to move to a market-based electricity system, but it is still currently operated by a national monopoly utility company, the Saudi Electricity Company. And so those agencies are all involved in KA Care, my agency. And what we're responsible for in this program is, number one, to provide a consumer-facing information resource, and in particular, a a calculation portal. But in addition to that, we're also providing certification for training courses for designers and installers. And we also advise the Saudi Arabia Standards Organization on standards that are related to PV equipment and processes. So obviously the thing that I'm talking about here is the online portal that where we have made use of SAM. And it's called Shamsi, which in Arabic means my son. And it has it's designed to be an end-to-end system, and it has 4 components. It will provide some, educational reading material. It provides a performance assessment for the solar energy system that's passed on to financial feasibility that analyzes the cost benefit of the system for a consumer. And then finally, it will provide connectivity for consumers to find contractors and to request quotations for a PV system they might want to install. And it's aimed at, you might say, primarily residential, but it clearly could support commercial. And in fact, the business cases for commercial users will generally be better because the tariff is higher for commercial users. So we have used SAM for the solar calculator, and you could say it looks a lot like the NREL PV Watts site. You start with you're presented with a map interface, and you go and select the location, and then you can either draw a rectangle to represent the area of your system, or you can just directly enter the system size. And in principle, I think if you just do that, you can actually run the simulation and get all the results. But you can click on an optional inputs button and bring all of the inputs that you would ordinarily use in PV Watts. They're made available here, and all of that information is packaged up and sent to SAM with the solar resource file that is supplied by KCare, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then that information is passed on to the financial calculator. So as far as the solar resource part goes, this is one thing that KCare has actually put a lot of effort over the years. And we operate a system of, I think it's 45 altogether, 45 ground stations where we're collecting solar resource data. That's been operational since 2013. And so it was originally set up actually by Battelle and working with some of the people that were originally responsible for the NSRDB in NREL. So it's well designed and has continued to be operated with some degree of collaboration with NREL over the years. And in addition to that, KCare has developed a satellite model that's based on the artificial neural network model using a satellite that's the Mediasat second generation, or MSG satellite. That's an EU weather satellite that's located at 0 degrees longitude. So it's sort of over West Africa. But it's a geosynchronous satellite, so we get an image of Saudi Arabia every 15 minutes from that. And the ANN is designed to use 6 of the infrared channels from that, as well as sun position and position in the Earth's orbit, to produce estimates of the solar resource. It's divided up into cloudy and cloud-free neural networks, and it produces the DNI and the DHI, and then GHI is calculated from that. So the reason both of those are important, I guess, is because we've only got up to about 4 or 5 years total of ground data. but the satellite data goes back to 2004. So we have a combined data set that the neural network, having been calibrated with our ground data, can produce time series that go from 2004 up to 2014. We're somewhat behind in adding additional years to this because we don't have access to the necessary weather data. But anyway, from what we've got there, we have developed TMY files, and we've done both 50th percentile and 90th percentile TMY files. So for the portal, we're using this set of TMY files. We've developed it over a grid throughout the kingdom on 10th of a degree intervals, so that gives us a TMY file within about 8 kilometers of any location in the country. And so I wanted to just say, from our perspective, why we think using SAM. I mean, one could always write their own solar simulator, but we think that there's some big advantages to us of using SAM, just in terms of, first of all, it saved us a lot of time. We think that it's obviously well validated. It's PV watts is not as complete maybe as the detailed model, but for the inputs that are provided, it provides a complete simulation, and it's well known. I think what's really important to me is that if anybody asks us how we're doing this calculation, we can simply say that we're using the PV watts module in SAM, and I think everyone in the industry, it's so well known, everyone will recognize that, and I think that it's important to us to be able to provide confidence to stakeholders throughout the kingdom in that, and we think that this approach really does deliver that. As far as the financial calculator, we're writing that one from scratch. We're not using any of the SAM calculations. Because of the net billing, it's important to actually calculate both consumption and generation on an hourly basis. And so we actually got a pretty thorough sample of load profiles for different customer classes throughout the kingdom from SEC. They did a study that they collected data on something like 2,500 meters across, geographically distributed through the kingdom. And so we are using that to provide a standardized load profile for any customer based on what their monthly consumption is. We can scale that hourly load profile to match their monthly consumption pattern, but it will provide the daily, or the hourly consumption pattern that is consistent with sort of a median case of the different user classes. We also will have an opportunity for the customer to just put their own load profile in, but in fact, virtually no one would have that information in Saudi Arabia because there's not a net metering, there's not a smart metering infrastructure present in the kingdom yet. So over time, we would expect more and more people would have the data to input that. So we combine the location, the same location that was used for the solar simulation is passed in here to look up the load profile, and that's combined to go and calculate on an hourly basis the net hourly and monthly consumption and exports, and calculate the bill with the export tariff and the consumption tariffs. And then that is, of course, passed into a lifetime calculation to ultimately result in the return on investment and payback time that's reported to the user, along with several graphs of both the PV system performance and the financial parameters in terms of monthly bill savings and annual savings over the life of the system. We have a tariff escalation scheme that we've worked through with the regulator to indicate the expected increases in tariffs in Saudi Arabia. It might be worth, just as an aside, to mention that until January 1st, 2018, the base rate for electricity consumers in the residential arena in Saudi Arabia was 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour. And the rate was tripled on January the 1st. So it went up to about, I guess it's about 5 cents per kilowatt hour at the lowest slab, and the higher consumption slab is about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And over the next few years, the regulator will be essentially driving all of the tariffs to something that will be a cost neutral position for the utilities, so that they're no longer really subsidizing electricity. And for that reason, actually, the attractiveness of distributed PV is certainly expected to get better. So we were provided a map of the service regions and that set of 2,500 meters that I mentioned in order to develop the service, the consumption load profiles for the system. Just as a little diversion into our software development, actually, I started on this. I think that the team that was originally working on it was completely unaware of SAM. They weren't really solar guys. And I said to them they should just call SAM, and in order to help them understand what it was they needed to do, I wrote a real simple, just command line version of PV watts that I built a spreadsheet around that to illustrate how this could be done using SAM. And at the time, that was before NREL had released the version of SAM that had the built-in code generator. But now that we're doing this, we did use the code generator that Nick discussed earlier. Nick and Doris both mentioned it, and we generated C# code because that's what the developers are using, and that went very smoothly, just to have all the code necessary to call this. The developers I mentioned is this Egyptian company called Link Development. The environment that they're using is Visual Studio 2017 with C# for all of the coding. And of course, it's a web application, so they're using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that's it's actually in a SharePoint framework, I guess. And they're using Angular for the interface, user interface, and they are using some SQL stuff, but the resource files are just stored as a collection of individual CSV files per the SAM format on a folder on the server. And there's a CRM component for managing the interface between consumers and installers and so on. In fact, the regulation is going to say that when a consumer or whoever submits the application to the utility company to install a PV system, they are required to submit the output of the K-Care Shamsi calculator, and that is intended just really to protect consumers from fraud, that there is what's considered to be an independent estimate being provided. So it's very important for us, of course, for it to be accurate, and of course, garbage in, garbage out. So there's lots of places where people can change inputs and could modify the results. So, but what I hope is that this will be useful enough that that not only residential customers, but also commercial customers and installer companies will also make use of it. So in summary, we are implementing our first nationwide distributed PV system in the kingdom, and we're supporting that using an online portal, and using SAM has been a tremendous help to us. And I'd like to thank INREL for the terrific work that you do on that. And I feel like it's added a lot of credibility and confidence to everyone that we're working with, and we expect that will be true with the public as well. So with that, hopefully I helped get us a little more on time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Russ. I think we're on time. So yeah, thank you for your great presentation. It was really interesting to learn more about some of the specifics of the Saudi Arabia market, and particularly how KA Care is helping facilitate DG, the eventual DG landscape. One question that it looks like we have Nate Blair in the room here who has a question for you. And
I don't have a question, but I was just going to say, Russ, that there are several people here working with K-Care on a couple of different activities, and while you were talking, I let them know that you were presenting, because I don't know that we made that connection previously, and so they'll dig into the webinar once, the recorded version probably. So.
Great. I hope I'm aware of all of the activities at INREL. I think I am. And so, yeah, thank you for doing that.
So I sent it to Jill Engelcox, who works here and has been engaged broadly in Saudi Arabia for a long time, and I believe is interacting. And then another person named Parthiv Karup, who's engaged more on the CSP side, I believe, with K-Care. And so there's some of those activities. Are you aware of either of those names?
Oh yeah, actually, in fact, Jill used to work at K-Care. I would say she hired me, but that would be a little of an exaggeration. But yeah, I know Jill very well.
Okay, great. So that's great. Well, we will make that connection on our end, and she'll probably chuckle when she gets my email then. So
great. All right. Thank you.
And yeah, I'm waiting to see if any other questions are coming in. If anyone has any questions for us, please type them in the chat. Let me see here.
I do see one, Nick. It's a question on the financial calculator slide asking about the source of the PV system cost per watt and financing parameters.
Yes. So some of the guys on our team have, there are some solar installers in Saudi Arabia, and some of the guys in our department have reached out to those and done a survey on what those installers claim they can meet in terms of cost per watt. And I think if I go back to that slide, I don't know. I guess we didn't show the number, but let's say it's quite attractive, surprisingly attractive, and I would chalk that up to being due to really low labor costs in Saudi Arabia. Essentially, there's a lot of expatriate labor that is pretty low, and as you know, sort of the labor costs of installation and soft costs are really a major part of residential. So we have an opportunity in Saudi Arabia because of the low labor cost to be able to do this, despite the fact that the tariffs are comparatively low compared to other countries.